Honest with Jasmine brand. I have with me today a TV producer, journalist, sports journalist, entrepreneur, podcaster, and now author, Jemele Hill.
Thank you.
Let's take a little toast to...
All right, this is going to be good. We got brown liquor.
Yeah, we're going to... Brown liquor. She prefers tequila.
I do.
But we have to work with what we have. And, you know, life is good, so we'll drink brown liquor.
Real vets, no.
Yeah.
Like, you just roll with whatever.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Okay. So, I want to jump right in. Mm-hmm. You've been in this sports journalist world for a while. Now, why was the time to do the book?
Well, to be honest, I didn't want to do a memoir at all. The market decided, which means money.
Okay.
You know, being very candid here. Listen, my literary agent told me there was a lot of interest in the publishing world in my book. Mm-hmm. It went to auction. And so,
what does that mean, it went to auction?
So that means several different publishers were interested in it.
Okay,
and so
you were in demand.
I was in demand. That's why I said the market decided. The market decided I was in demand. And obviously I went with the publisher that had the strongest financial offer. Okay. And so seeing that it was this amount of interest, and I've always wanted to be an author. I just did not want to write about me.
Okay.
I wanted to be a fiction author, right? And so, and I don't want to say that in the past tense. I still do.
Yes.
And as my literary agent pointed out, this would be a good entry point.
Okay.
But I'm the type of person that once I commit to something, I'm committed to it.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, I've committed to writing this memoir, and now that I have, I'm leaving every play on the field to use a sports analogy. I'm just gonna put it all out there and let people absorb it, and knowing that because of some of the tough subjects that I tackle, that of course you're gonna have people judging you and you know, projecting onto you and all these other things. And I was like, I'm okay with that, because if anybody should tell their own story, it's me. Okay.
So my next question, I feel like you answered it already. The name of this show is Brutally Honest with Jasmine Brand. I feel like your book is brutally honest.
Okay.
In a good way.
Yeah.
Did you initially plan to get that deep, or did it just kind of unfold as you were going through the process?
No, I set the intention to get that deep because I thought it was the only real way to tell my story. I mean, if anybody out there has read celebrity memoirs, a lot of them can be quite hollow. Like you feel like they're really trying to make themselves look good.
Yeah.
I did not go into that with this intention. I went into it with wanting to give people a deeper understanding of who I was and what has shaped me. And some of those things that did shape me are not easy things to discuss. I also know that, especially in our community, there's an incredible amount of shame over some things. Obviously, I talk in the book at length about my mother's addiction. There's a lot of shame over abortion, which is why I disclosed that I had an abortion. So I wanted to make sure to give people sort of a sense of empowerment in talking about these things. So maybe that we can start to talk about them differently than we have been. Okay.
Your mother is a really big part of this book. She went through a lot.
Yes,
we were talking about earlier. She is she makes me so proud, and she's not my mom. Like, she's been through all that. And when you started the book, or, you know, when you talked to her about it initially, was she apprehensive? Because you really share a lot about her.
Well, she actually wasn't. She said, hey, this is your story. Okay. And I know that she told me she knows that our stories are very much intertwined, but she felt like I had the right to share my perspective. Now, that doesn't mean that she necessarily agrees with all of the perspective, but she felt like the very least that I deserved was being able to share how I really felt about things. And look, at this point, my mother already in her life has felt very judged.
Yes.
And so she is, in her mind, she's like, what worse can they say about me that hasn't already been said? And, you know, obviously the public, until basically I went on this book tour, did not know her.
Right.
But within our own family, within some of our, some of her close friend circles, she's felt that judgment.
Yeah.
And so that's why she was just like, this stuff isn't going to bother me.
I don't even know y'all, so who cares?
Exactly.
I have people in my family and friends and stuff that have been through the same things as your mother and you and stuff like that. And you have forgiven your mother. But I'm wondering, was it easier for you to forgive your mother because she's turned her life around, she's on the other side of it? Do you think, if she was still sort of battling some of these things, it'd be hard? Because I'm asking that because there are people that still have family members that are still battling addiction. And so how do,
I would say that it's easier to forgive people when they're accountable. Even though it took my mother a lot of stops and starts with her addiction. And, because her last relapse was like in 2009 or 10.
That was a while ago.
Yeah, it's a while ago.
Yeah.
Actually, it was. I think it was a little after my grandmother. My grandmother had a stroke, and it was very severe, and she died within a few months. And when she had the stroke, it was so traumatic for my mother because she discovered her. And my grandmother had been in her house for a few days and had a stroke. I think it was like 2 days she might have been in her house, and she didn't pick up the phone. So when my mother went over there, she saw her, let's just say, I don't want to get too descriptive, in a very horrific condition. Yeah. Right. And so that sent my mother back into a dark, place. And so, but she's always been honest and forthright about anything, and so because of that transparency, her accountability, it made it that much easier for me to forgive her, which I did many years ago. Right. The question that I always have for her is, has she forgiven herself? And I don't think she has. I think that's going to be the hardest part for her to overcome in all of this. Yeah.
Because I saw the clip of her doing when you all did the Red Table Talk, and I felt like she was still, it's something like it's a day-to-day sort of thing if she's able to kind of forgive herself and give herself grace and stuff like that.
It very much is. And, her and Gammy, Jada's mom, had a moment over that because they both, and this is why I think that conversation was really powerful and really healing for my mother, is, all she's thinking about is the things she missed, and not really like plays or things like that. My mother was there all the time because I was with her, but she doesn't feel like she was present enough. And not only that, I think she looks at what her addiction cost in terms of our relationship. My mother still thinks that we have some unhealed trauma in our relationship. And because of that, she feels like at times I distance myself from her. We're not as close as we could be, even though on my end of it, I don't really see it that way. Yeah. But I think she's just very sensitive to it. And until she can kind of get to a true place of forgiveness, I think it's going to be a bit of touch and go in terms of whether or not she forgives herself.
How does your family feel about, because you talk about your family.
I do.
How do they feel about
Well, largely I don't know, because the only person in my family that I sent an advance reader copy of the book was my mother. And this is no disrespect to my father, who has unfortunately made some of his feelings known on his social media about it. Okay. And because of that, I really didn't care about their approval. I don't want that to sound disrespectful. Yeah. But being a writer as long as I have been, I understand very much that you can't write for the audience. You have to write your truth. Whether people respect it or not, or whether they accept it, absorb it, whether they come after you for it, you can't think about that, because then you start writing based off how you think people might feel and not writing what's really in your heart. Yeah. And so that's why I was very careful about who I let read it beforehand, because I wasn't looking to be validated. Okay. I thought the people that I let read it beforehand, like, they deserve to read it, because these are relationships that are meaningful to me, that I want to maintain and preserve and never disrespect. It's why my husband read it beforehand, because I didn't want him to be surprised by any information. He knew most of it. He may not have known a lot of the specific details, right? But I wanted to make sure that certain people in my life, that they, had an idea of what was to come. Right.
I was going to ask you, and I feel like you kind of hinted to it, like how, you talk about your parents, your biological dad and your mom having kind of abusive and toxic relationship while you were growing up, when they were together. Right. How is it now? Do you talk to your dad?
Yeah, I do talk to my father. I think we still have a lot of healing to do in our relationship, just because I do feel like there's been a lack of accountability there. I have forgiven him. And even though I said a moment ago that when there is forgiveness, accountability is kind of right there. But I also would say that that when you do forgive people, so you can't go into it forgiving them because you're expecting an apology. Sometimes you have to forgive them for you. And it was just a lot of things with him that I needed to let go. And so, yeah, we certainly talk. And, over the years, as he's going through some experiences, I've been there for him. I love my father. I don't have any issues with him necessarily, but I do think that when it came, my mother's accountability was far greater than his. And so I think that's why her and I, in addition to the fact she raised me, but that's a big reason why our relationship is in a different place. And he and I still have some ways to go.
Yeah. In the book, you talk about you were at a neighbor's house and a relative attempted to like rape you or molest you or which was a lot.
Right.
Which was a very traumatic experience for you. Did it shape how you deal with men or relationships? Your mom was very supportive.
Yes, she was extremely supportive. I mean, I would say maybe a little bit, but not a lot. What shaped it was seeing how my mother interacted with men. That more shaped how I dealt with relationships. And I would say, it was hard for me because my mother was somebody who was very practical about relationships, as you read in the book. She's definitely one like can't be no romance without finance. Like that's how she get down.
Understood.
Right, but I also saw because she felt that way that there was a power dynamic. Because let's be real. Anybody that's like paying all the bills and putting in on it, they expect a certain amount of control.
They do, yeah.
And I never wanted to put myself in a position where a man felt like he could control me through finances.
Right.
This isn't to say that, I was looking to be with somebody broke. What I am saying is that I was fine with building with somebody or having more equity in that because I didn't want that kind of dynamic. I talk about one of the relationships I had in the book where it was offset, where I was more of the breadwinner and he wasn't.
This is before your husband.
This is before my husband. I was, more of the breadwinner and he wasn't. And I lost respect for him. But I didn't lose respect for him because he wasn't making as much money as me. I lost respect for him because he wasn't as driven and ambitious and he seemed content to be in those circumstances. And that's what bothered me more than anything.
Okay, hold that thought and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Brutally Honest with Jasmine Brand. I'm here with Jemele Hill. I want to ask you about something I've been hearing you say in different interviews, and you may have touched on it in the book, but you wanted to make a conscious decision to break the generational curse. So, when did you decide that you probably will be the one to do that?
Well, it's interesting because even though I used to hear my mother say all the time, talk about generational curses, one of the reasons why she was drawn to her faith walk is that she was trying to break a generational curse. And it occurred to me probably not until I was well into my adulthood that I had actually kind of done it in a lot of respects. I was much more financially stable than pretty much, most of my family. And certainly if I'm just limiting this to my mother and my grandmother, who were the two main women who had the most influence on my life, like I certainly broke it from that standpoint. I was living a life that was about, choice and really exploring the world and getting able to do things that they could only really imagine doing. And that's part of it as well. I gave myself choices and option, and I was looking for a certain kind of liberation, which I was able to provide myself, which they didn't have, because so much of the decisions that I made to put myself in this position were about doing everything differently than they did.
Right.
Because I feel like it can go one in two directions. Either you kind of follow the generational curse or you break it by doing something totally different than what has been the pattern in your family. It's the old adage, you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to keep getting what you're getting.
Yes.
And so seeing their choices, I said, well, for sure I'm not doing hard drugs ever.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
That's number one.
Yeah,
that's number one.
Yeah.
And two is that, especially once obviously got out of high school, I wasn't pregnant because my mother, that was her big thing, having had me at 18. So then that's another one. And so as I just started to really think about it in my mind, like one by one, I was able to break these stigmas and curses that were kind of really systemic in my family.
Shifting gears, I want to talk about your career. In the book, you talk about your role models. Were there any Black women in sports journalism that
I looked up to? Oh, sure. Like when I was coming up in college, there is a woman, she's in the Baseball Hall of Fame, Claire Smith. Read her religiously because think about we're talking like the mid 90s, a black woman covering baseball on a national level.
Think about that now.
Right, exactly. Like, I don't even have to take you back to the 90s. Like, Claire was an exceptional writer. Donna Britt, who in D.C. For the Washington Post, she was probably my favorite columnist, her and Michael Wilbon.
Okay.
Sensational writers. So even though she wasn't a sports writer, actually she was a city columnist. But nevertheless, like, there was a lot of black women who were writing in different kinds of journalism that I really respected. But Claire, for sure, when it came to sports.
Okay. You've done a lot of first, I feel like, and this is a male-dominated industry that you're in, and it's white.
Yeah. No, for sure. Like, the white dudes running it.
Yeah, they're running a lot of industries, but they are running yours.
Yes.
Was there a first you weren't prepared for?
Well, I really wasn't prepared to be. I wasn't the first. There is a distinction, a slight one. I wasn't prepared to be the only.
Okay.
Firsts are one thing. Onlys, that's something else, right? When I was the only black female sports columnist at a daily newspaper in North America, right? That was tough.
Yeah.
And a lot of people might look at that like, oh, that's an accomplishment. It shows how far you came, and and that you're the cream of the crop. No, that shows my industry is trifling. That's what that shows. Because while, yes, I'm a good sports columnist, I'm better than a lot of folks, I'm not that damn good where I would be the only one. So unfortunately, to me, it sent the message that the industry didn't respect people like us, that they didn't see value in our voices and what we could contribute. So I was really disappointed in the industry. And what's more disappointing is that really not a lot has changed.
Yeah. So I'm always still, when we're writing stories and I'm reading them and I'm like, the first blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yo, we still doing the first?
Right.
Like, this is wild.
The fact that we never had a black woman that's been governor ever. Stacey Abrams could be the first. Like, that's crazy in 2022. So I understand what you mean.
Yeah. In the book, in public, you talked about how you felt like ESPN didn't necessarily have your back in terms of the Trump situation. First of all, do you have any regrets about those tweets? Probably not. Secondly, how do you wish...
You answered your own question.
Secondly, how do you wish ESPN had handled that situation?
The only thing I wish they would have handled differently, like, I understood the suspension. This is like when you even insinuate about a boycott, especially of a league that they have $1 billion deal with, there's going to be some smoke with that. I did understand that I violated ESPN's social media policy with Trump. They don't want you to personally attack politicians, for sure. Got it. What you cannot do is that when you have somebody in that position with that authority, with that machine of the government behind them, you can't let them come after a journalist of yours.
Okay.
That is, to me, an egregious sin. I come from an old school newspaper background.
I think that's an old school thinking.
It is an old school thinking, right? And so that's my mentality, because I've worked at plenty of papers where they've had aggressive investigative journalists that have gone after the politicians in that city, because that is what journalists are supposed to do. You're supposed to hold the people in authority positions accountable. And whenever the city government tried to bring the smoke, they had their reporters back. And so when ESPN didn't do anything after Trump personally attacked me, after Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the former press secretary, said what I did was fireable, that's when I knew our relationship was irretrievably broken.
So your mother is conservative. What was her reaction to the tweets that you fired off about a former president?
It's a combination of being conservative and being old school. Like, she is from, maybe it's generational, but I'll just say from the generation where you respect the office no matter whoever's in it. And so her position was mostly about that. Her other thing, too, is that, at that time, I have this very high-profile job on SportsCenter. I'm making a ton of money, right? And she's just like...
lose your good job, girl.
Exactly. The elders just say, you lose that good government job. Like, that's how she was sort of thinking about it very practically. And... as I make no bones about it in the book, it's like, I didn't like the response. I was like, as I told her when she said that about respecting the office of the president, I was like, it's hard to respect it when the person in it doesn't respect it. Yeah. Right. And so, she constantly was asking me like, well, is it worth it? And, don't, I think she thought that because of all of the conversations about Trump at the time, and that have continued, that I was being too influenced by this perception of him, and that I was wagering something that was way too costly and, wasn't worth it. And so I didn't really want that conversation. To be honest, after that is happening and you have what feels like the whole world attacking you.
Yeah.
I didn't need the lecture, right? I needed her to just
support.
The support. The support did come.
Yes.
I want to be very clear about that. But initially, I think it was just the shock of it. She just kind of immediately went to opine, and I was like, I don't really need all that.
Yeah.
So,
but also, I'm sure, and she has a different experience, and her daughter is this big TV sports journalist, and she is successful. I don't want anything to jeopardize that.
Correct.
So I'm sure she's,
Yeah, she was thinking of it that way. Thinking of, in her mind, being a protective mother. It's like, you've worked really hard to get to this point, to this platform. Why risk it all for some hot takes on Donald Trump? And I was like,
because I got Naomi in me. That's why, Mom.
Yeah, exactly. Like, don't act like you don't know the daughter you raised. Of course, I got something to say about this fool.
Yeah, that's hilarious. I like in the book that you talk about your career mistakes. Like, you really are very transparent and like, I wish I could be that, transparent. Somebody was interviewing me the other day. Like, can you talk about some of the mistakes you made? I was like, I don't really want to talk about them. Like,
But you have to. I think just because there's a lot of young people that I know that watch me, people who want to be journalists, people maybe who aspire to be at ESPN.
Yep.
And I feel like if you share with them, I'm not saying you have to share everything, but I feel like if you share with them some of the mistakes that you made, you hopefully prevent them from doing the same thing.
Yeah, but it speaks to who you are and how transparent you are in this book, because you really detail a lot of things. And one of the funny, I shouldn't say it's funny. One of the memorable ones is your reference to Hitler, in one of your columns.
Yeah.
What did that experience sort of teach you, overall?
Well, as one of my writer friends emailed me, the dictator you use is Stalin. No one ever cares about Joseph Stalin. And I was like, okay, dude, that was pretty funny.
Yeah.
But no, it taught me not to be lazy. Something that's never brought up, I made a reference to R. Kelly that I think may have been worse than that. Or at least on the same.
Did you write about that in the book, the R. Kelly reference?
I don't think I did. Yeah, I don't think I put it in there. So this is breaking news. Now everybody's going to go back and be like, let me see what this column said.
What did you say?
Oh, I don't remember the gist of it, but it was
You sure you didn't talk about that in the book?
I don't know if I talked about the R. Kelly reference.
Okay.
I don't know that I did, but I felt like that one was, especially in hindsight, the way it's aged, I was like, oh, that's brutally bad. But in terms of what I learned is that, you can't be lazy when you have a platform like that. You can't be lazy in any platform. Right. It doesn't matter the magnitude of it. And they had asked me to do an off-day column. This is when the Lakers and Celtics played, and this was back in, I think, 2008. And the truth is, I didn't really have anything to write. I couldn't really think of anything. It was nothing juicy going on. The Lakers were about to get eliminated. Mm-hmm. All right. That was just what we were facing. And I probably should have been honest about that with my editor. Like, I'm not really feeling anything. But instead, I conjured this entire ridiculous idea that I would talk about how the Celtics, and it was a real thing about, this is the Celtics team with Rajon Rondo, Ray Allen, Kevin Garnett, Kendrick Perkins, how they were a pretty Black team, not just aesthetically, but just the way they played and just how they operated. Yeah. And when I was growing up, everybody hated the Celtics, except for people who lived in Boston, probably. Mm-hmm. And being from Detroit, we really, really hated the Celtics because they
Some people still don't like the Celtics.
Oh, no, some people don't. But the Celtics stood in our way to get a championship. So I came from that time where everybody looked at the Celtics as being racist, even though they had a lot of Black players. But it was just because it was Boston. But that perception seemed to change with that particular group of Celtics. And so, as I often have to say, I did not say anything positive about Hitler. Right. I did not affirm Adolf Hitler. I did was I compared Celtics fans to Nazis.
Sound like
not
Kanye.
My finest moment.
You sound like Kanye right now.
I know, right? That's like not my finest moment.
Let's hold that thought and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Brutally Honest with Jasmine Brand. I'm here with Jemele Hill. One of the things that I appreciated in the book was you sharing your personal story about having an abortion. Mm-hmm. And here's why. Obviously, there's this whole conversation that's going on across this country about limiting women's rights. And I noticed and even you said in the book that sometimes when we talk about having abortions, we use examples like, this is the reason why, because I got raped or incest or whatever.
Extreme examples.
They're extreme examples. Yeah. And I think it's very rare that women publicly talk about, I had an abortion because I didn't want to have a child. Just period. Like I just had one. And I appreciated you talking about that. What was the reason? What was the motivation behind you sharing something so personal? It
was also is part of my story, one, but also what you said is that I was tired of the conversation. And I'm not saying that there doesn't need to be a conversation around the trauma aspect about why women having access to abortions is right.
Right.
Beyond just the rape and the incest, there are women who medically need them because of they've gone through a traumatic childbirth or something wrong has gone there. So that very much, all of those things should be a topic of conversation. But then there's other women who use this option because they could, because they felt like having a child would be too big of an interruption, maybe because they felt like they couldn't afford a child, whatever it may be. Just trying to change the picture a little bit about who people think deserves access to abortion and who people think have abortions. And what's really shocking to me is that, because I use excerpts from the book in a piece I wrote for The Atlantic about why I had an abortion. There were so many women in the business who contacted me and told me that they too had one and that they've been so afraid to talk about it and that they were able to gain a sense of empowerment. That didn't mean they were going to go around telling the world, but it just made them feel better. Because another thing that happens sometimes when you have an abortion is that you feel guilty for not feeling guilty.
Right.
And I went through that period for a while. Like I never regretted it one single day. And I wondered, like, is something wrong with me? Do I just not have a heart? Because the narrative is that women who have them regret them and that they live with this pain. And that's not to say that there aren't women who do.
Yeah.
But my story didn't fit that narrative. So I wondered, for a while, was there something wrong with me?
Yeah. Full transparency. In my late 20s, I had an abortion and I didn't want to have a child. And I didn't, who I was pregnant by, I didn't want to be pregnant by. But,
Same.
so it wasn't deep for me.
Right.
I did not feel bad afterwards, but no one ever talks about it publicly. Me and my girlfriends talked about it. Like, I'm cool, but it's something that women don't talk publicly about. So I appreciate it. When I was like, I appreciate her. Because usually when we get examples, it's something extreme. And I feel like it adds value to a different part of why women decide to make this choice or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Because when people are arguing about this very volatile issue, it's always because they sort of have that perfect victim mindset of that, just like in our rape culture, that they have like, the only people that deserve justice are the women who are virgins and this happened to. And it's like, no.
Right.
You deserve justice just because you were violated. Full stop. Yeah. And so I feel like with abortion, it's a very similar
And narrative. I feel like the more we talk about it openly, I think there may be a better understanding.
Yeah, it removes the stigma.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about something more positive.
Okay.
Let's talk about love.
I'm gonna love this pivot, hopefully.
Okay. Let's talk about your relationship with your husband. Were you apprehensive about some of the things you shared about your previous relationships and him seeing it? I mean, obviously he read the book before.
Yeah.
It was public, but were you apprehensive?
Unless I put in there like I still love this dude or something, I think.
Right.
And I think I was mostly fine. He knew about all of the relationships that I disclosed in the book. And, even like you never know, because sometimes, when you have a partner, you never know exactly like what the things you shared, but like maybe you didn't go in depth about a particular, like, oh yeah, we used to fight about money, but maybe you didn't say, well, this one time he did this. And so one of the reasons I wanted him to read the book is so that he was fully aware and fully abreast, even though he generally knew the cliff notes of all of those relationships that I talked about.
Okay. All right. So I want to talk about your 30 for 30 project or documentary you're working on with Colin Kaepernick. Spike Lee is the director. You're executive producer.
Correct.
What can we look forward to in terms of that particular 30 for 30?
Well, the main thing is that people should look forward to the fact that Colin is saying everything that happened to him, everything he's experienced in his own words. And it's been so long, I think, since the public has like really heard from him. And, what he's experienced, what he's gone through, what his life looks like now. I think people will be it will be very compelling.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's an extraordinary project. Spike Lee has been wonderful. Colin's been exceptional. And I've just learned so much, not just about the process of filmmaking, but just putting together a story. So I think this is going to be really powerful. And a lot of the people who are still rooting against him will feel ashamed when they see, just kind of how things have played out and unfolded.
Okay. In this process, I'm sure you got to know him way better and much more in depth. What is something that we don't know about him that the world should know?
How selfless he is. I think he became a symbol to a lot of people, and sometimes symbols are too far removed from people and they don't understand them as real people. But Colin is very selfless. He's very intentional. And even just how I got involved in this project is a testament to that. He called me out of the blue because while we were friendly, we were not friends. And he called me out of the blue as he was deciding what was the best platform to tell his story. And he wanted my input because ESPN/Disney was one of the main pursuers. And he called me because he said he did not want to in any way undermine me by choosing to work with ESPN. And he's like, just give me your take on it. Like, what do you think I should do? And I told him, and people may find this to be odd considering our awkward parting, but I told him ESPN and Disney was the very best vehicle for him to tell his story. Now, there's definitely some people I was like, you don't want to mess with that person or that person, but this person, yes.
Right.
And besides, you have the leverage. They're going to let you tell your story, your way, but this is the best vehicle. And he said, I appreciate you being honest. I was like, listen, if you'd have never called me, I would not have thought less of you for working with them. It makes all the sense in the world. Yeah. He was like, I appreciate that. Then we hung up and then he called me back like maybe 15 minutes later and he said, what would make me feel really good about doing this with them is if you came on to be an executive producer. I was like, you ain't got to threaten me with a good time.
Right.
I'm in.
What a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, it was incredible. And so I owe him a debt of gratitude that can never be repaid for him involving me in this project. And I already knew that Colin was a good person, even though I didn't know him well, but just the energy and not just beyond the protest. I mean, I knew other people that knew him, so I always kind of felt those vibes from him. But that to me showed me how much integrity this man has. And in getting to work with him, like you see it in just everything that he does, just super intentional about empowering Black people, very intentional about this. And I think that's extremely admirable.
I don't know if you remember this. I interviewed you during the pandemic and I asked you at the time if you thought he would ever be able to come back in the NFL. And I think you said no. Do you still feel the same?
Still my answer.
You think it's over?
I do think it's over. And it doesn't give me any joy to say that. It's very sad, actually. I just don't think the NFL will ever not be resentful toward him.
Okay.
And the owners have made their stance because this is kind of a collective stance. It's understood they're not giving him another opportunity. So unfortunately, because of that, despite how hard he's worked, despite how good he was when he was at his best, I just don't see it happening.
Okay. Let's take a break and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Brutally Honest with Jasmine Brand. I'm here with Jemele Hill. I want you to tell me about the Unbothered Network.
So I'm really excited about this. It's a partnership I have with Spotify. Obviously, my own podcast is exclusive to Spotify. But as we saw all these conversations that we were having in this country back in 2020 about race and, what can be done to better support Black creators, especially. I approached Spotify with the idea of a podcast network just for Black women, featuring obviously Black women podcasters. That was most importantly Black women led, right? Because there's a lot of products that purport to be for Black people that are not Black led. Yes. So in everything in terms of production, decision making, all of that. So they said yes, which was great. And the first week of November, we have our first podcast launching on there. It's a podcast called The Black Girl Bravado. Okay. And
who's on that?
These two sisters, Germany and Brittany, they're amazing. It's a wellness. I would put it in the wellness camp, but they discuss self-love, self-care, relationships, And it's very much giving homegirl vibes. So this is different because
you sold me.
They shoot very straight. And then the second week of November, our first original podcast, because the Black Girl Bravado was already a podcast, but we licensed it. The second podcast we're launching is our first original. It's called Sanctified. And the hosts are Deborah Joy Winans, yes, of that Winans family.
Yes.
Charity from Greenleaf, y'all know who I'm talking about, and Levon Briggs. And this is looking at the taboo topic of how Black women worship. And so it's not, it's churchy.
It sounds very churchy.
It's churchy, but it's different because they're talking about the things you talk about in the pews and out of them. So abortion, marriage, sexuality, all these topics they're hitting on because there's a lot of Black women now who definitely feel like they have a strong faith, but don't fit in the church.
Yeah.
Right? Because
that's kind of how I feel sometimes.
Exactly. Yeah. And this is for women like you because, you look around at church membership and it's overwhelmingly dominated by women. Yes. Church leadership is not. And that's a problem.
Which is wild.
Very wild. And so they're going to talk about, they're going to get into it. I listened to the first.
They're going to get into some things.
Some things. I listened to the first 2 episodes. And when I tell you I laughed, trust me when I tell you, y'all have never heard the story of Ruth and Boaz this way. And I'm going to just drop the teaser. It involves oral sex. Y'all have never heard this.
Not with Ruth and not with Boaz.
I ain't going to even get into it. Okay. I'm just telling you, y'all need to listen to this.
The podcast is called
Sanctified.
Sanctified.
Yes. Exclusive to Spotify.
Is your mom going to listen? It might be too much for her. It might be too much for her. It might be too much for her.
Luckily, they wouldn't have a phone line because she'd be burning that.
Burn the thing up. You and Carrie Champion, who was your good friend, had a show together. Are we going to find a new home for that or what?
We don't know yet.
Okay.
Yeah, everything is still kind of up in the air. I mean, we were on Vice. Obviously, we were both on CNN Plus and, grand opening, grand closing, which it had nothing to do with us, right? I mean, this is what happens when new management takes over sometimes is that, they shuttered the whole thing. And so I think we'll always try to figure out a way to work together. And it really is disappointing because this was going to be a very different kind of show. And we had already started shooting and we're in production. And unfortunately, it's like, lost footage that'll never be seen because we were having some fun, going to weed growers and like.
What I saw, I liked.
Oh yeah, we were definitely having some. We was in the streets. Yeah, we was outside.
Y'all was outside. Yeah. Okay, switching gears, I want to ask some sports questions.
Okay. All right.
What are your thoughts on Kanye's Donda sports?
So,
I know we don't talk. I know we're all talked out about Kanye, but this is sports, so I feel like you know.
I mean, I'm confused by the school, by the sports. Like, I know he has an agency. Obviously, there's some athletes that have already announced that they are leaving the agency.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you, how do you feel about these big athletes that jump ship, like Aaron Donald and
Jaylen Brown? I think was the other one. They have to protect their brand.
Yeah,
like the moment there's some toxicity that is associated with somebody like him, the way at the high level it has, like these guys are trying to be marketable. They're trying to make money. And you would be naive to think they were not going to run into a situation where a company might want to mess with them, but didn't want to mess with their representation because they didn't want to look like they were in any way supporting Kanye West. So they made a business decision as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. Over the past few years, and longer than that, we've seen push for more women in sports. What are some things that the average sports fan can do to increase viewership and sort of support women athletics? Like a person like me,
Well, like the WNBA is a good example. The WNBA, I mean, it's funny, the pandemic was really good for them in terms of like their viewership just exploding. They already were doing well and trending north, but it's really exploded in the last couple of years. But I would say women need to support women's sports. Like most of the women's sports that are on ESPN, the viewership is primarily male, like overwhelmingly male.
Right.
Whereas you look at something like the NFL and it's almost split in terms of fan support between men and women.
Right.
Those same women need to watch women's sports. Right. And I get that sometimes for a lot of women, their entry point into watching sports is like through a romantic partner. Right.
Yeah, it usually is.
It usually is. Yeah. And so I need them to branch out and start supporting other women.
Okay. That's fair. Is this LeBron's last year?
No, I think he is going to play until he can play with his son.
Okay. So is that another year? Is that 2 years?
I think it's another year.
Another year.
I feel like, and you know, his son
And
obviously
talked about that.
Yeah, he said like he wants that moment of them being on the court at the same time, playing for the same team. I mean, it's something I don't think we've ever seen.
Yeah, that
in
would
the
be a
NBA.
first, right?
That would be a first to see them playing alongside each other.
Who is your basketball GOAT?
Oh, Michael Jordan.
Okay.
Yeah, it pains me to say that because I'm from Detroit and, you know.
And there was a big rivalry.
Yeah, it was a big rivalry. It pains me to say that. Look, I know LeBron is probably going to own every significant record in the NBA. And this is in no way, just because you're not the GOAT doesn't mean like you're, you know, like you're the bottom of the barrel. It's like, as long as you're in the conversation, to me, that's a testimony in itself. But I think it's a lot of the people who talk about it now, particularly the younger generation, they didn't live through it.
Yes.
See, I lived through
Yes.
when Michael Jordan went to the finals, you knew he wasn't losing. I lived through, obviously, the Pistons at first, you know, crushing his spirit. And then, you know, he obviously, you know, rose to basketball prominence. But they just don't know what that was like to see this man play. And the level of dominance is just... It's really hard to put into words. So for me, it's Michael Jordan.
I remember being very small, and my stepmom and her family were all from Detroit, and I remember just it being a whole thing. Like it was serious, and I was just like, "Oh my gosh!"
We were playing no games.
Yeah, it was the whole thing. Okay, who's your female athlete Mount Rushmore?
Oh, okay, Serena Williams.
Okay,
for sure. Diana Taurasi. I'm trying to think of Simone Biles. Mm-hmm. And since you always have to have a fourth, I'm like, what sport am I missing?
Right.
As I think about like great female athletes. And then just thinking about the influence that a lot of female athletes have had. God, I could say Althea Gibson. I could.
You can't just saying that. Is that who you're going to say?
No, that's not who I'm going to say. But I'm just like, now all of a sudden all these women are running through my mind. And I know I'm forgetting somebody really obvious. And as soon as you post this clip, somebody be like, well, what about such and such? I was like, oh, I should have thought of such and such. Those are my three. If I think of a fourth, I'll come back.
Okay. Who's going to win the NBA championship?
The Golden State Warriors. Okay. I think they're going to repeat. I think they realize that this is their last season probably together with the team looking this way. And I know, obviously, there's been drama because of Draymond Green, but I think they know that this is their last stance with this team. And so I think that's going to drive them all season.
What can the public do to help Brittany Griner?
Continue to keep her name in the forefront, you know, like very much like in the media, on social media. We have to continue to put pressure on our own government to make this deal. Because at this point, the only way she's getting out of Russia is a negotiated release. And so we need to say her name and say it often so that people do not forget that this incredible woman is over there, you know, sentenced to 10 years in jail. In a Russian prison.
Yeah.
She's a queer woman. She's very vulnerable because of the way the country feels about, you know, the gay and queer community. So we need to keep her in our prayers, but most importantly, we need to keep her name relevant at all times.
Okay. Let's hold that thought and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Brutally Honest with Jasmine Brand. I'm here with Jemele Hill. I have some general life questions to ask you.
Okay.
Has nothing to do with anything. They're just all random.
Okay.
Okay. So what keeps you up at night?
Oh, what keeps me up is always thinking I missed an appointment. Like my mind is like it just is running sometimes at night. I'm like, did I miss something? Did I not do something? So it's like I'm literally in my mind going over my calendar or going over something because I have fear of mismeeting or fear of I'm supposed to be somewhere and I didn't know I was supposed to be there. So
have you ever missed a big meeting?
I'm sure I probably have, but it hasn't been any recently that I've known of. So my calendar controls me sometimes when I'm laying in bed at night. Okay.
What's one vice you wish you could give up?
Potato chips.
I love chips. What kind of chips do you like?
So, I mean, barbecue anything, I'm in. And sometimes this is...
Do you like Utz?
Love Utz.
Okay.
Oh, look, Don't talk to me about the crab flavored ones.
Yeah. And you're here where you need to get them too.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So it's like very much what chips you love.
Yeah.
I think it's such a regional decision. Like there are chips in Detroit, Better Made chips that are like
never heard of them.
Yeah, it's a Detroit thing.
Okay.
So they have these Better Made hot chips that are incredible. Better Made barbecue that are incredible.
Okay.
Also like Jay's hot chips.
Never had them. I like hot chips though.
I love hot chips.
I heard does Detroit have good pizza?
Great pizza.
Okay.
Yeah. We're in there. New York, y'all don't want none.
Okay. Detroit is so Detroit. Wherever y'all go, y'all are so Detroit.
We go Detroit wherever we are.
Yeah, y'all be Detroit.
Listen, it's because we're never looked at as like the cool city. I mean, I think a lot of that has changed, definitely in the last like 15, 20 years. But when I was growing up, Detroit was only on the national news for the murder rate.
And the Halloween.
And because the Devil's Night.
Devil's Night, yeah.
Because, it was a very awful tradition they had in Detroit of burning down all the abandoned houses. So, like, there were some years, it was like 600 fires in the city right before Halloween. So, because we have this stigma, that's why people from Detroit put on for Detroit as hard as we do.
Y'all go really hard.
We do. And we want everybody that comes to Detroit to love the city. So we will you will get the best tour of your life.
Listen, I've been to Detroit. with Ange a few times.
Oh, Angela,
yeah. And so
our adopted Detroit sister.
Yeah, she's like Detroit adjacent at this point.
Yes,
she got the hair. She got a lot of stuff going on there. So she's like, "Why don't you come to Detroit?" I'm like, "I'm not trying to go to Detroit, but we have a good time."
See,
I eat good when I'm there.
Our food game is tight, and people don't realize just the variety of food you can get in Detroit because we have very cool ethnic enclaves. So, like,
but y'all have your own style, rap flow.
That's right.
It's
we our own language. We wear
what up though?
We wear mink coats to the movies. That's like
and
to
shades,
the shades.
Which makes sense because earlier I was like, "Oh, those are nice shades." To Detroit, that's the Detroit in you. It's all making sense to me. Okay, moving on. What's the best compliment you've ever received?
This just came to mind. So the first time I went to the White House, and yes, that was a flex. I said first time. This is when Obama.
I've never been. That's why. Go ahead.
This was when Obama was in office. Clearly, I would not have gone the last administration. Yeah. So the first time I got invited to the White House, and we're in the receiving line to meet President Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama, and as soon as I go to introduce myself, Obama grabs my hand. He was like, "Oh, from my favorite sports show," and I was like, "Oh my God, Obama watches.
He knows you.
He knows who I am."
Yeah.
And then Michelle, who was so gracious, she gave me a great hug, and my soul may have left my body, but that's beside the point. It probably did. Yeah. I was floating from above, and she was just like, she was like, "Me and Barack watch you all the time, and I just love the way that you give it to those men." And I was like, "Oh my God, is this happening?"
She's like that, a girl. I love that. Okay, I love that story. If you weren't in this world, in this arena, in terms of your profession, what else would you be doing?
I think I'd be a lawyer. I can't do math, so it would have never been anything math related. Respect science. Don't love learning about science necessarily. Okay. So considering that so much of the last portion of my career has been about, proving your point and writing columns, my opinion, feels like that's a good place for a lawyer to be. Okay.
Who's the last person you texted with?
Oh, it was my team at Unbothered. Sorry, it's not anybody cool.
Okay, that's fine.
It's a team, Unbothered team, was it?
When is the last time you cursed someone out?
Dang. I mean, not professionally cussing people out, but not actually using the swear words. I mean, it's been a long time.
Okay. When's the last time you were cursed out?
It's been a long time.
Okay.
I'm just like, I don't
Beyond that.
I think maybe in my youth.
Okay.
Yeah, that might have been.
Some people's like every other day, so
it's somebody cussing me out. I was like, it's probably like my mama, to be honest.
Yeah, I was thinking about my dad be going.
Right, I was like, it was probably
for no reason.
It was probably my mother back when I was a kid.
What trend in sports journalism would you like to see end?
Everything isn't a debate, right? It just like immediately, as soon as somebody achieves something great, it immediately shifts to a debate type of narrative. Like, was this the best ever? Or was such and such better than such and such when they did? And it's like, can we just enjoy that we just saw something great without it turning into everybody arguing?
Yeah. I do feel like as a spectator, we do expect the debate
I think we're less, I think sports fans are less appreciative than they used to be.
Yeah.
It used to be you could sit down and be like, oh, wow, that guy just, scored 30 points. That was really amazing. Now it's like he scored 30 points, but it wasn't as good as when such and such scored 30 points. It's like, this is nonsense.
Yeah. What do you want your legacy to be?
Well, I mean, this is probably going to sound kind of corny, but I think I want my legacy to be service, right? Is that I've been able to accomplish some really cool and amazing things in my career. I've had some great individual moments, won an Emmy, won a couple NAACP Image Awards, all kinds of awards and accolades I've been able to achieve. And that's great. And I'm happy that I was able to receive validation in that way. But if I do not leave here having left something, specifically for Black people, even more specifically for Black women, if I've not aided in changing things in the industry in some way that is of magnitude, then I would be sort of disappointed in myself.
Okay.
Now, I know that's a huge undertaking.
Yes,
I'm not saying that when I leave, if, sports media all of a sudden isn't 85% white men, that I'm going to feel bad. It's not that.
Right.
But that was why this podcast network was so important, because that's something that I want to be able to stand the test of time, that I want people to, when it's successful, not if, but when it's successful, for people to say, this is not just, this isn't about charity. This is good business to amplify Black women. And so I need to leave something like that is of help and of service to other Black women.
Okay. If you had to pick one song as a soundtrack to your life.
Oh, God. What would it be?
Yes.
Mary J. Blige is My Life.
My
life, in the sunshine.
And if you could ask God one question and he'd answer loud and clear, what would you ask him?
I wouldn't ask him anything about my own life.
You're so unselfish.
I know, but it's like a mystery. Like, I would want to know. I mean,
what?
Like, I would want to know, like, who really killed JFK? Like, what was the conspiracy behind? Like, I would want to know those kind of things. Like, okay, who was behind Biggie being murdered? Like, that's what I want to know. Like, you can fill me in now, God. I need to know these things. So probably really annoying questions like that. I wouldn't be like, hey, why'd you send me through that in 8th grade? It's like, like tell me who killed Tupac. That's what I want to know,
I think that's a first.
Does everybody else say something personal?
Deep or something? Yeah.
I know.
Not you.
Not me. I was like, I want to know this. Like it hasn't been on all of you all's mind.
Right.
Like all this
it
time.
has, but I just wouldn't think to ask God at this point.
Totally.
But anyway, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here. Make sure that you pick up Uphill. It is super inspiring. I enjoyed our conversation. Please don't make this the last time. We have to do this again.
Does that mean to get back on here, I have to write another book?
You got to write another book. Okay. It has to be just as transparent and juicy and controversial.
Thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.